Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another um, AVAS Presents presentation. I am really pleased to be joined tonight by, of course, Peg Rooney and our very special guest, Delia Malone. Uh, who I have had the pleasure of getting to know better. Delia is involved heavily with Sierra Club in Colorado and is the steward and facilitator for Living with Wolves, the exhibit that is has just closed here in Pueblo, Colorado. And it was an absolute pleasure to have you here, Delia, and to have the exhibit here. And I'm really excited to hear your presentation this evening about the wolf management plan and the Colorado's wolf restoration plan. Um, I would love to introduce you now. Delia Malone is an ecologist at the Colorado Natural Heritage Program. As a field ecologist with CNHP, she conducts biological surveys of upland, wetland, and stream habitats and biological surveys for rare plants and animals across Colorado, from Dinosaur National Monument to Purgatory Canyon and everywhere in between. Delia is also wildlife chair for the Colorado chapter of the Sierra Club, vice chair of Roaring Fork Audubon, and is a passionate advocate for the preservation of all things wild. When she's not burning or conducting biological surveys, you can find her hiking or skiing the high peaks and ridges across Colorado. Welcome, Delia.
Thank you, Bree.
And I would love to introduce Peg Rooney of the Arkansas Valley Audubon Society this evening. And I will let you go ahead and take it away for this program. Thank you so much, Ruth, for being here.
Sure. Thanks, Bree. I want to welcome you all here tonight and remind you that there are signs all around us that our planet isn't doing very well. Bird species are on the decline. Wildlife populations are being disturbed by human development, and we're experiencing crazy weather, devastating weather due to climate change. And, we can wring our hands and say, oh my gosh, that's terrible. Or we can do something that might help. And one of the best ways to help is to join a conservation organization like the Xerces Society or the Center for Biological Diversity or the Sierra Club, or in our case, protecting birds and their habitats, joining the Audubon Society. And membership information is on our website, Southern Colorado Birds, abbreviated SOCO, so socobirds.org. And I hope you'll join us. All right, and now I'll turn things over to Dee.
Boy, Peggy, thank you so much. And Bree, thank you so much. It's an honor to be able to talk with you all tonight. And it's so timely to talk about this right now because Coloradans have an opportunity right now to weigh in on whether they want to see Colorado Parks and Wildlife's wolf management plan or whether they prefer and are passionate about Colorado's wolf restoration plan. And that's what I will delve into tonight. So thank you for the invitation. I appreciate being here. So one of the first questions we have to ask is, why were wolves extirpated from Colorado in the first place? I would like to propose that it's because we don't understand, and what we don't understand, we often fear. And so wolves were hunted almost to extinction by the 1930s in the lower 48. In Colorado, the last wolf was killed in 1945 in Conejos County. Wolves once occupied gray wolves almost occupied the entirety of the lower 48. What we see in the orange color is what the habitat that they currently occupy up in the northern Rockies, down in southern New Mexico and Arizona. What we see in the brown is potential habitat that's been modeled through scientific studies. Almost 2 million gray wolves once roamed the entirety of the United States. And in the West, according to DNA evidence, there were about 348,000 or so wolves. Today, We have about 6,000 remaining wolves, about 4,000 of those in the Great Lakes states, and about 1,900 or so in the Northern Rockies, with just a handful down in New Mexico and Arizona. So it's this concept that drove us to extirpate wolves across the lower 48, this mythical wolf. The myths include the idea that wolves will harm people, that wolves will eat all the livestock and put the livestock industry out of business, that wolves will eat all of the elk and the deer, and the hunting industry will go out of business. And a big one we didn't appreciate, the benefit, the many benefits that wolves bring to all of our lives. So, tackling those myths one at a time, the wolf of fairy tales. Are wolves a threat to people? Well, since 1995, when wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone and Idaho, there have been over 100 million people hiking, camping, and wolf watching in Yellowstone National Park. There's not been a single wolf injury or attack in the park, with approximately 100 wolves in the park every year since their reintroduction. Have wolves killed a lot of cattle and sheep? Well, we can look at these very boring graph charts and look at the number of sheep up here in this upper left chart in the United States, and this lower left chart, the number of cattle in the United States, and see that with regard to sheep, the number one cause of the loss of sheep in the United States are coyotes. Wolves are way down here, third from the bottom with regard to sheep loss. And with regard to cattle loss, the number one cause of mortality in cattle are respiratory illnesses. And way down here at the bottom, with regard to wolf loss, the number fifth loss, dogs, domestic dogs, and eagles, and coyotes are far above the cause of mortality in wolves. And if we want to drill in a little specifically, in the Northern Rockies, there's about 1,900 wolves, a lot less since last year. These statistics are from 2015. The cattle population in the Northern Rockies in wolf country, as illustrated in this diagram, is about 1,602,000 or so. The confirmed cattle losses are 148. So in Colorado, with about 500,000 cattle in what would be wolf country, we can expect, with this same sort of statistics, about 40 cattle being lost per year to gray wolves. And if we implement coexistence strategies, herding instincts, range riders, that's simply cowboys and cowgirls, some sort of techno things like flattery, if we use livestock guardian dogs, and there's a lot more, we can expect to see no losses whatsoever if non-lethal techniques are appropriately implemented. Additionally, losses, according to Proposition 114, and in all of the states where wolves are currently existing in the Northern Rockies, livestock losses are compensated. For instance, in the state of Washington, compensation to ranchers are twice the market rate to accommodate the potential for cattle or sheep that aren't found. In Wyoming, the compensation is 7 times the existence, the actual confirmed loss rate. We feel in Colorado that, and according to Proposition 114, that compensation must be fair to both the rancher and to the public that owns the public land on which ranching occurs. So another big myth is that wolves will decimate the hunting industry. Well, if we look at some statistics, what we see from the evidence in Wyoming and Montana and Idaho is that elk numbers have actually increased since the reintroduction of wolves in 1995. Why is that? Because wolves move the elk around so that vegetation can recover and that more elk can actually be sustained. A myth is that wolves will drive down hunter success. Well, what we see is that hunter success is as high or higher than it's ever been in all of the states where wolves currently have a thriving population. So what does that look like in Colorado? Well, Colorado supports almost more elk than all of the northern Rocky Mountain states put together. About 286,000 elk are supported in Colorado. Every year, hunters kill about 40,000 elk. If we had 750 wolves in Colorado, that may sound like a lot, but consider that there's somewhere between 2,000 and 7,000 lions. So in Colorado, CPW doesn't really know. So 750 wolves is really not very many. But if we had that many, they would kill about 9,000 elk per year total. That's about 4% of the elk population after hunters have killed what they kill every year. A big difference that we've got to consider is that hunters target elk in their prime. They're not looking to kill the weak and the diseased and the old. They want elk in their prime. Conversely, wolves select the weak and the diseased because they're easier to kill. So by doing that, wolves actually increase the health of the elk population. Another myth, there's no room for wolves in Colorado. Interestingly enough, when we do the statistics, the human density on the west slope of Colorado here and the human density in the northern Rockies is comparable. Actually, the human density is a little bit lower in Colorado than in the northern Rockies. And the northern Rockies up here is the livestock density is comparable to the livestock density on the west slope of Colorado where wolves would be located. So the next big question is, why reintroduce wolves in the first place? Wolves have been absent for about 75 years from Colorado. Their absence has harmed the wildlife health and diversity. Habitat has been damaged across Colorado. And even if we think about one of our most dire consequences from our warming climate, water storage has been reduced because of the ripple down effect of the absence of wolves in Colorado. One of my favorite ecologists and biologists is Dave Armstrong, one of our most important mammalogists in Colorado. And I love his quote, walk lightly here, know as much as you can. Get as stubborn as the natives, the Utes, the bristlecone pine, the imperious owl, and imperial elk. Respect the genius of Colorado. Pass it on intact to enrich another generation. Wolves evolved with Colorado. They evolved with the elk, with the plants, with the vegetation. To have an intact Colorado to pass on to future generations is essential to restoring, enhancing, and protecting the genius of Colorado. So, from Michael Robinson's book, Predatory Bureaucracy, one by one, with unlimited federal dollars by trapping and poisoning. These wolves were too eliminated. With the death of Lobo, the siren call of Colorado's wildlands was silenced. My take is that we don't only have an ecological imperative to restore wolves, we have an ethical imperative to right a terrible wrong that was wreaked upon Colorado. Oopsie. Wolves make ecosystems healthier. How do they do that? They do it primarily by restoring a natural balance between predator and prey. What that does is that restores the ecological connections. There's a cascade of trophic effects that occur when prey are in balance with the amount of vegetation that the land supplies. And what the ripple down effect of that is to restore and enhance biological diversity. And the ripple effect that that has is to increase the capacity of the landscape to support even more species. Less is more. We often make a mistake in equating the numbers of ungulates, elk, deer, with a healthy ecosystem. The opposite is quite the truth. In Yellowstone National Park, ecosystem health improved with the number as in carnivore numbers improved. It's not just wolves that were increased in Yellowstone National Park. We also saw an increase of mountain lions and grizzly bear and black bears and weasel and a whole host of carnivores increased as elk populations declined because plant populations increased. And with the plants, other species could improve. It's a mistake to think that it was just wolves in Yellowstone National Park. Human hunting also played a role, particularly humans can't hunt in the park, but outside of the park, human hunting played a role in decreasing elk populations. That should be viewed as a success story. Fewer elk restored a balance between the number of ungulates and the amount of food available for them. And when the amount of food increased, other species could increase. So what we see in this graphic is when we restore wolf populations, that impacts the elk populations. A balance between the elk populations and the food available allows other species like beaver to thrive, which impacts species like cutthroat trout. And when cutthroat trout increase, species like bald eagle increase. And when wolves are around to moderate the elk population, vegetation like berry species, serviceberry and raspberries and so on increase. And that improves the habitat for bears. Wolves also have an interesting impact on coyotes. Wolves don't like coyotes. Coyote populations decrease. And when coyote populations decrease, species like greater sage grouse have less predation and they increase. Species like pronghorn increase because coyotes predate pronghorn fawn. But don't let it be said that coyotes are bad guys. Coyotes have a really important role in the ecosystem in balance. Coyotes predate critters like southern red-backed voles and mice and other critters, and they moderate those populations. So taken together, wolves make ecosystems healthier by restoring these connections, these trophic feeding connections, thereby enhancing biological diversity. In a time when biodiversity is crashing, wolves can make an important impact on restoring that diversity. When we restore beaver, what we've seen is that beaver play a really important role in protecting vegetation from wildfire. Wolves feed other animals, increasing their survivorship. What we've seen is an increase in grizzly bear populations in Yellowstone National Park, an increase in lynx populations, songbird populations, even black-capped and mountain chickadees improve, increase in weasel populations. Wolves also increase the health of prey populations. In Colorado, chronic wasting disease is running rampant. And by removing and focusing on the sick and the diseased elk, wolves improve the population of elk populations. So our historic election in 2020, Coloradans voted to restore wolves to Colorado. The vote was close, with about just a little over half of Coloradans voting to support Proposition 114, and just a few a few percentage points voting to not support Prop 114. But the vote was just the beginning. Now the real work has begun in developing a plan to enable the restoration of an ecological balance and the restoration of wolves to Colorado that will enable the vision of Colorado 114 to restore an ecological balance. Proposition 114 had some very clear mandates in it. These are a few, some of the most important ones, that initially the restoration of gray wolves to the state must be designed to resolve conflicts with the ranching and farming industry in the states. A few others. It must use the best available scientific data available. We must hold statewide hearings to acquire information so that we hear from all Coloradans. Livestock losses must be compensated for. And finally, that in the definition of gray wolf, that they are defined as a non-game wildlife species in Colorado. Non-game means that they are not subjected to hunting. So Colorado Parks and Wildlife has been developing a wolf management plan for the last several months. Colorado's CPW's former agency director as of yesterday, who retired just yesterday, stated that we are evaluating the best path forward to ensure that all statewide interests are well represented. Unfortunately, there's an inherent conflict. CPW seeks to minimize populations of large carnivores because they have historically seen carnivores as competing with hunters for game animals or threats. Interestingly enough, hunters account for only about 4% of the adult humans in the United States, which sets up kind of a disproportionate interest in the hunting population. CPW's strategy to ensure this balance of statewide interests were well represented was to set up wolf management advisory groups. We had 2 advisory groups, the technical working group and the stakeholder advisory group. The way that was set up, there were 17 individuals on each of these groups. Colorado Parks and Wildlife selected the representation. 4 out of 17 people on the technical working group supported wolf restoration. 17 of 17 supported lethal management. On the stakeholder advisory group, 5 of 17 individuals supported restoration, while only 1 of 17 supported non-lethal management only. In other words, 16 of 17 supported lethal management. So important couple of ecological and biological factors in thinking about how wolves should be stewarded in Colorado. From a quote from way back when, "For the strength of the wolf is the pack, and the strength of the pack is the wolf." Pack structure, family structure, enables the survival of the wolf. It enables wolf culture, and it enables their ecological effect. Family is essential for the survival of the wolf, and families are essential for wolves to have their ecological effect in moderating elk populations and in restoring a natural ecological balance to wolves. If adults are lost to hunting or to lethal management, the knowledge of survival is not passed on, and that knowledge is lost. We have an example of this in Denali National Park, where the Toklat pack, who had been in the park since at least the 1940s, when Adolph Murray studied that pack, was lost to trapping just outside of the park. The knowledge that enabled their survival was lost, and that pack no longer exists. An important factor in determining how wolves will be managed is the fact that wolves moderate their own populations. Hunting and lethal management is not necessary to control wolf populations. Wolves are territorial, and fights between packs limits wolf populations. In fact, intra-pack territoriality in Yellowstone National Park, where human hunting is not allowed, is what limits wolf populations. But if family groups are disturbed by human hunting, then pack structure and dynamics actually is disturbed, and wolves the population was actually increased. So it's important to maintain wolf family structure so that wolves maintain that territoriality, and they maintain their ability to be ecologically effective. Wolves were making a comeback, but last year, state agencies in Montana and Idaho and Wyoming dramatically changed wolf management so that wolf killing has been exacerbated in those 3 states. Ecological effectiveness is lost. Wolf dynamics has been greatly disturbed. So in Colorado, we have an opportunity to change that paradigm. We have a coalition of groups coming together. We've developed what is called the Colorado Wolf Restoration Plan. You can read that plan online at this location. And primarily, I want to go over this chart just a little bit to look at how the Colorado Wolf Restoration Plan will differ from Colorado Parks and Wildlife's management plan. Colorado Parks and Wildlife will be presenting their plan on December 9th. And this is, we know from what has been recommended, what we think will be seen in that plan. What they're recommending is 8 to 10 wolves be reintroduced each year for 3 or 4 wolves. What our conservation plan says is that we need at least 48 wolves introduced over the first 2 years, with 1 breeding pair in each of 12 identified wolf pack zones. So a big difference is that the Colorado Wolf Restoration Plan has identified 12 zones across Colorado's west slope where we feel that wolves, according to the science, are needed and can be supported by the habitat and the elk that are there. CPW's plan suggests that wolves be downlisted from endangered to threatened status when there are only 50 wolves anywhere in Colorado for 4 successive years. What we're saying is that there be at least 30 successful breeding pairs for 4 consecutive years, and that they occupy at least 8 of the 13 wolf pack zones, so that there is wide distribution of wolves across Colorado and that there is evidence that they are successfully breeding. CPW will suggest that when there are 150 wolves, not 150 breeding pairs, but 150 wolves anywhere in Colorado, they could be in just 1 county, that they be delisted. What we're suggesting is that only when there's 75 successful breeding pairs, and they occupy at least 10 of the 13 wolf zones, or when there's 750 gray wolves for 4 consecutive years, then they can be delisted and declassified as a threatened species. Our population goal, their population goal for the entire state of Colorado is only 200 wolves. We know from the science that we need at least 750 wolves for there to be a genetically viable population for the long term in Colorado, and that those wolves occupy at least 10 of the 13 wolf pack zones, so that they're widely distributed, so that the ecological benefits of wolves are distributed across Colorado, not relegated to a mere corner of the state. Importantly, finally, CPW and the technical working group suggest that when wolves are delisted, that Colorado Parks and Wildlife consider reclassifying wolves to a game species, in other words, trophy killing. Proposition 114, which we voted for, prohibits recreational trophy killing of wolves and advocates that wolves remain classified as a non-game species in Colorado. There are dramatic differences between Colorado Parks and Wildlife's plan and the Colorado Wolf Restoration Plan. The Colorado Wolf Restoration Plan is a science-based proposal to guide wolf reintroduction and recovery. It's a plan based in current ethical science, which supports that wolves can only perform their ecological role if their family groups remain intact, and recognizes that non-lethal management strategies are more effective and ethical than lethal control strategies. I have the plan up here at this URL, which I invite you to read, please. Basically, in sum, no trophy hunting, and no trapping or snaring of wolves in Colorado. Restore wolves throughout Colorado's public wildlands with no limits on population abundance. We know that coexistence strategies work to prevent conflict between wolves and livestock. We agree and we support compensation for livestock owners impacted by wolves, but we also know that it needs to be fair to both livestock owners and the Coloradans that are the owners of public land on which ranchers graze their livestock. Finally, our plan is an ethical, science-based restoration plan. We know that wolves provide far-reaching ecological benefits, but only if they are abundant and widespread across Colorado. We know that wolf families must be intact in order to survive and to enable their ecological role of moderating ungulate populations. We know that wolves regulate their own populations. We also know that trophy killing destroys family dynamics and undermines the ability of wolves to perform their ecological role. We know that wolves can and do exist with livestock where conflict avoidance strategies are appropriately implemented. I'm asking you to please contact your Colorado Parks and Wildlife commissioners and ask them to support the Colorado Wolf Restoration Plan. Also, please contact Governor Polis, your legislators, and your representatives that influence decision making. So I would love for you to ask me any questions and have any clarifications for this presentation. And I greatly appreciate your interest and your attention. And I know that was a lot of information. So please, I'm open to any questions in the time that we have remaining.
Well, I have 2 questions from Facebook that were posted. Um, the first one is, what would be the largest obstacle to be overcome for wolf reintroduction in Colorado? What's the biggest obstacle to obtain that?
I think the biggest obstacle are the myths about wolves. The myth that wolves are not important, they're essential, and the myth that wolves are going to harm our way of life. In fact, wolves are absolutely essential. You know, this is thank you, Peg, for recognizing the incredible value that wolves have to our bird community. What we see in Yellowstone and in Banff and in Voyager National Park and in places where wolves populations are robust is we see that bird populations recover. So as far distant as that appears, we're intimately tied to the health of wolf populations. So bird communities in Yellowstone National Park, birds that hadn't been seen for 40, 50, 60 years, we saw those birds come back with the recovery of wolves because the vegetation recovered. So the myth that we aren't, that our future, that our well-being is somehow separate from the well-being of the natural world, of which wolves are so important, is maybe the biggest myth that we need to overcome. Our well-being is intimately tied to the well-being of wolves and of birds and of plants and of elk And so that may be the biggest myth that we have to overcome.
Wouldn't you say then that the notion of coexistence is the basis of that philosophy, that if not only should we be um, devising ways to coexist with wolves, but coexist with nature and coexist with our natural surroundings?
Absolutely. Coexistence, it's kind of funny because coexistence is sort of a word that people often think of as sort of this hippie word that was used back in the 60s. But I think it encapsulates exactly what you just said, Bree, that we have to coexist. We must coexist with our natural world for ecological benefits, but also, I think that we need to recognize that ethically we are part of and not apart from
Mm.
the natural world, and that coexistence is essential to our ecological health as well as our ethical foundations.
Mm.
Absolutely. I feel that having that dynamic in our lives is a balance to our mental health as well, and having these dynamics within nature and being able to access these things is absolutely essential to our balance as humans, in terms of um, things that we are able to experience, and that we should be grateful to have these things at that we are able to access these things. Absolutely.
That was wonderful, Bree. Thank you. And I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you.
Dee, can you talk a little bit more about non-lethal methods of control?
Absolutely. So our non-lethal methods, probably I think one of the best, what the science shows us, what the evidence shows us, is that the most effective non-lethal strategy is human presence.
Mm.
Wolves are afraid of us. They've learned, and they pass on that knowledge that we are dangerous. And I really just don't like that at all. But it's true, and they pass on that knowledge. So our human presence, simply cowboys and cowgirls, is the best deterrent to livestock loss. Where we are present, and what we see, the evidence shows that where humans are present. So up in Tom Minor Basin, for instance, it's a great demonstration project, and not just Tom Minor Basin, but in livestock um, examples all over the Northern Rockies with both cattle and sheep. What we see is that where humans are present, wolves leave. They are afraid of us. And so what we see is basically um, no loss of cattle, for instance, at Tom Minor Basin. In the Wood River Wolf Project, which is a sheep ranching operation, that the loss of sheep goes to almost zero, where um, uh, those strategies are used. So there's numerous strategies. Human presence is the best.
Mhm.
Livestock guard dogs are really important, and a variety of livestock guard dogs. Some simple strategies like the use of fladry during calving and during lambing operations. Using of fladry is flags on an electric wire.
Mhm.
And you can't use that in big situations, but when there's lambing operations and calving operations during that time of year, using fladry to at the most vulnerable times of the year can be very effective if used properly. So there are numerous strategies that are tried and true, and we can use those in Colorado. and bring what we've learned up in the Northern Rockies down here. Another really important strategy is the removal of um, carcasses,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
cows, sheep that have died from other reasons, disease, removing those carcasses so they are not an attractant to wolves and to grizzly up in the Northern Rockies.
Mhm.
Delia, we have some questions coming in from the social media platforms. Jennifer writes, I know you already spoke about bird populations increasing, but what are the positive impacts will the reintroduction of wolves have on the ecosystem?
Oh, she
Which
should
we could
call
probably
me.
expound on another hour, I'm sure.
Exactly, at least another hour. So, what we begin with is the restoration of vegetation. Because we're moving the ungulates around primarily and we're preventing them from overgrazing. So when we see the recovery of vegetation, unless in Colorado particularly, and as an ecologist, I've conducted plant and animal surveys across Colorado. And so what I see, what I've evidenced over the last 25, 30 years is the decimation of riparian streamside vegetation. And when we lose that vegetation, we get degradation of stream habitat, downcutting of streams, the lack of out of bank recovery of water out of the stream, so we don't get water storage. And in Colorado, that storage of water from out of bank flows is essential to climate resilience. So entire ecosystems are changed because stream bank vegetation has been lost. And when streams downcut into their banks, we see stream drying because we don't get that out of bank storage. When stream and riparian vegetation becomes decimated and degraded, the willows and the aspen and the cottonwood that provide so much habitat for birds, for mule deer, for all of the other critters that rely on that vegetation, those species start to decline. And when those species start to decline, the key here is that we speak of biological diversity, and we speak of the connections. So I had that slide up there showing the connections between the vegetation and the beaver and the fish and the birds and the pronghorn. When we start losing those species, we start losing the connections. It's like the strands of um, uh, yarn in a weaving. When we start to lose those strands, we start to lose the species, the fabric becomes weaker. The ecosystem becomes less resilient to change. And that's when we start to see the degradation and we start to see the drying, we start to see species loss. So entire ecosystems start to unravel because of the loss of the vegetation, because of the imbalance between the ungulate population, the overabundance of ungulate populations, the overgrazing of ungulate populations, and the supply of plants in that landscape.
I have just a comment from Henry on YouTube. Says, thank you, Ms. Malone. We will keep our eyes peeled for CPW's December 9th wolf management plan, review your team's wolf restoration plan, and hold our state policymakers accountable to Prop 114. So you have a new fan
New advocate,
for sure.
absolutely.
And Jennifer is just a super fan too. She said she would really love to reach out to you later, and is would really like to talk to you more about this presentation, about your knowledge.
Our ranchers, I suspect they're not cooperating. They're probably fighting against the restoration. So how can we get those folks on board?
So I want to say that in general, that's absolutely right. But I also want to say that there are not numerous, but several ranchers in Colorado that I know of, and several ranchers. I wouldn't say numerous again, but enough ranchers in the Northern Rockies that do support wolf restoration.
Okay, good.
What our goal is to bring the knowledge and evidence of how to coexist that has been learned in the Northern Rockies to Colorado ranchers, so that we can coexist. This can be beneficial for livestock producers
Mm.
because what we've seen, what we've evidenced, is that where livestock are managed to coexist with carnivores, livestock actually benefit. Ranchers actually benefit because the range can actually be improved. So we really can coexist. This isn't just a hippy dippy sort of wolf hugger thing, although that's me. We truly can coexist. And we know that from the evidence. We're not just, the restoration up in Yellowstone, we really didn't know what was going to happen. But 27 years of evidence, we've seen the evidence. We've seen the range improve. We've seen elk herds improve. We've seen biological diversity enhanced. So we can bring that knowledge to Colorado. We can do this. And that is my hope. I think with time, it took us 120 years to change the ecosystem to a wolf-less landscape. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some convincing. It's going to take some evidence. And I believe, I think that we have the vision, we have the evidence, we know that we can do this. And I think that we absolutely need Coloradans to re-engage, to let Colorado Parks and Wildlife know that we want ethical science to guide this plan. We can be different.
Yes, absolutely. Well, this was wonderful, Dee.
Yes.
A lot of great information.
Thank you so much. And with that, we are about a minute from the hour. And I wanted to thank you both so much for joining me tonight for this program. And as I said before, we have some new fans out there. And Delia, we have some people that would like you to reach out to them. I have some contact information to pass on to you. And just many people that have got on the chat have just said, knowledge is power. We need to just keep pressing on and make sure that our politicians in Colorado are following through on their promise to fulfill Prop 114. Absolutely. So I want to thank you both tonight for joining me, and take care. And thank you so much again.
Thanks, Dee. Thanks, Bree.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.